In this module, we will discuss the effective ways to include evidence in your work. After having completed this module, you, the student, will be able to choose an effective method for including evidence, either summary, paraphrase, or quote, and format evidence to minimize grammatical errors. The most instantaneous way to derail your argument is to misuse evidence, either by presenting no evidence at all, making pronouncements, or using evidence inefficiently. Remember, the burden of proof is on you. At this point, you should not be offering any argument or position without evidence, primary or secondary sources, to back up your claim. While you may be skilled in gathering your information, using that information to your advantage is not as easy as it seems. Regardless of the type of argument, and after vetting your evidence using STAR, there are still a few rhetorical, logical considerations to make. You must determine how you will use your evidence, when you will include it, and whether or not the evidence is doing you any favors. So, how do you use your evidence to your best advantage? Bearing in mind that you are in charge of your people. You do not want to have your evidence overshadow you either. Outlined here are simple steps to follow when using evidence in your writing. First, let us look at presenting your evidence in general. There are three forms of evidence you can incorporate into your text. You can summarize your information. We will all remember doing summaries in school. The same principle applies. Note graphs, tables, and charts are forms of summary. 2. You could paraphrase, restate the argument in your own words, or you can quote your source directly. Remember though, that whichever method you choose, you absolutely must credit your source. If you've ever been in a conversation where you requested specific advice and received a catalog of details, you already know the value of summaries. Summarizing information saves your reader some time while allowing you to focus on key points of your collated data. It also demonstrates that you have done the scholarly work required. Your audience has no deducing or adducing to do. Summarize your source's argument when you are presenting an opposing view. This is vital if you want to maintain your authorial voice. The idea here is that your writing is your voice. Whenever you quote directly, you are allowing another voice into your narration. If this is an opposing voice, you run the risk of derailing your authority over your argument. On the other hand, summarize when you are using the source as a support for your view. In this case, you still want your voice to be the dominant one. If you have explained your position well enough, the source is more garnish than ingredient. A direct quote here might seem redundant, like you are flogging a dead horse, or as Hamlet mumbled to Gertrude, you are protesting too much for it to be sincere. A good summary requires you to identify the main argument or premise of the source, especially as it relates to your position. You must identify what the entire argument, entire article, chapter, and so on is arguing before you can summarize. In other words, your summary should demonstrate that you read and understood the source. Your summary should also identify the point of connection between your source and your topic. Sometimes our source is not directly related to our topic. For example, referencing Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God and climate change issues. Edwards' text is a blistering puritanical sermon equating disasters with divine retribution, while climate change is usually a scientific debate. However, you may be defining climate change as divine retribution, the fire next time, and environmental damage as sin. Unlike summarizing, paraphrasing is restating a specific point from your source. Rather than sum up the whole argument, you may want to represent a source's point in your own words. Like summarizing, paraphrasing maintains your control over your narrative. It also shows that you are familiar enough with and fully understand your source enough to put it into your own words. As you are in control of your essay, you may choose to paraphrase rather than interject another person's voice into your prose. When paraphrasing, avoid the original source's syntax and grammar. Replacing a few words does not alter the material enough for it to not verge on plagiarism. Also, note that if paraphrasing creates awkward sentence structures or ambiguous language, you may want to quote after all. Quotations often seem like the most convincing form of evidence in an essay. When you insert another's voice into your work, it may strengthen your own authorial voice and ensure that your argument is at least two-sided. To be obnoxiously repetitive, you do not have to quote all the time. In fact, you should only use direct quotes if it strengthens your argument in a way summarizing or paraphrasing cannot. You may choose to quote directly if the language is exceptional. Either the source's wording is so cogent and precise that it is difficult or unnecessary to paraphrase or summarize, or the language is memorable and striking. Sometimes you just want to quote Shakespeare directly because the language is too rich to paraphrase. Maybe the source's phrasing best conveys the pathos or logos needed to make your point. You may also choose to quote because you want the reader to see the language you are about to interrogate. You want your reader to see how you handle the language. If you are quoting an opposing view directly, you want to show the word choice of the opposing view you are dismantling or addressing. Typically, you would include short quotes, less than 4 lines, highlighting a specific phrasing that, hopefully, undermines that opposing argument. For example, your source continually refers to someone in animalistic terms. Highlighting this language undermines your source's credibility as an unbiased analyst. This in turn calls into question the veracity of the argument. If the source is supporting your view, or if the source is being analyzed, you may also want to quote directly to highlight rhetorical devices you wish to analyze. This is especially true of block quotes, which are longer than 4 lines. With an extended quote, you can show how the source structures language and how this informs meaning. This is especially handy when quoting lyrics or poetry or passages in literary texts. It is also useful when engaging in theory. Long or short, including a direct quote makes your writing an active conversation. Bearing this in mind, you should never simply insert a quote without engaging it. You must integrate it into your argument. It is up to you to make the link between your quote and your argument. I cannot stress this enough, but always, always, always introduce your quotes. Apart from that, there are other technical issues to consider when inserting a quote. Pay attention to your syntax and grammar, making sure that your quotation does not disrupt your sentence structure or produce errors. Do not italicize your quote. MLA style reserves italics for emphasis. Thus, if that mythical Australian picks up your paper and sees all your quotations in italics, he'll be confused about your overemphasis of everything, which means you lose any emphasis you wanted to add. Your coda punctuation comes after the parenthetical citation. Here's an example of a short quote. According to Bakhtin, Carnival is the people's second life, organized on the basis of laughter. It is a festive life. Festivity is a peculiar quality of all comic rituals and spectacles of the Middle Ages. If your quotation is 4 or more lines of text, use a block quote. To insert a block quote, after your attributive phrase, skip to the next line and begin your quote. Indent quote 10 spaces. Please use your indent tools or tabs. Do not use quotation marks, and the punctuation appears before parenthetical citation, which is on the same line as the last line of the quotation. Here's an example of a block quote. Bakhtin argues, this exaggeration has a positive, assertive character. The leading themes of these images of bodily life and fertility, growth, and a brimming over abundance. Manifestations of this life refer not to the isolated biological individual, not to the private egotistic economic man, but to the collective ancestral body of all the people. Sometimes you may choose to insert a word to make the meaning clearer, or remove a word or phrase because it is unnecessary to the point you are making, or you may want to indicate that the error is in the quote and not simply a typo. When you are adding a word, use square brackets to indicate you have inserted something into the quote. For example, he, Joseph, went that way. If you are removing unnecessary text, use ellipses to indicate an omission. For example, James likes tea. To maintain integrity, you may choose not to alter the quote in any way. If the error is original to the text, use square brackets SIC, S-I-C, to indicate such. For example, James likes tea. There are also some rules to consider when quoting verse or lyrics. If you are quoting less than 4 lines, separate each line with a backslash rather than a line break. For example, Pan from the West was the best. 'Tis the saga of the Pan man who used to wear the crown when Steelban was king in this western town. If you are quoting more than 4 lines, block the quote and maintain the line breaks and visual structure, especially with poetry. Here is an example of a block quote of poetry. God of the pathway, God of the tree, God of all parting. You do not have to quote directly to avoid plagiarism. Plagiarism is more than taking someone's words as your own. It is taking someone's ideas as your own. Whichever method you use, you must remember to credit your source. That being said, plagiarism is relatively easy to avoid. Generally, you can avoid plagiarism mistakes if you introduce and engage your evidence. Let the reader know that this is a different voice and why you are referring to the source in the first place. In other words, avoid starting with the quote. This may be fine for journalism and storytelling, but it is not the best method for including quotes in a scholarly paper. Remember, you want to demonstrate that you are in control of your argument. You want your voice to be dominant. If you introduce your source, you maintain that control. As for engaging your source, never ever just slap a quote into your work and then move on. The burden is on you to show why the source is relevant and necessary. Do not make your audience work for your meaning by mulling over the quotation, paraphrase, or summary. The audience might draw conclusions you do not intend. When introducing your source, use an attributive phrase, a phrase which identifies your source, usually matching how it is listed in the work cited. For example, according to John Smith, as Smith argues, or Johnson posits that. You should always make it clear that you are engaging someone else's idea. This enhances your appeal to ethos, suggesting that you are an honest, trustworthy, and well-researched author. And it allows you to discuss opposing views with clarity.